G'day again, guys and girls. So continuing working our way through course content. So we must be up to about topic 5. If you've got one of the new books, if you're working old book, you're probably up about topic 6. But either way, we're looking at the specific factors that affect learning. Okay. So we are talking phys ed, but this could still be applied to anything, whether it be coaching, going down that avenue, or whether it be just your learning here at school. Right. So the first thing we need to make sure of is we understand the nature of the task. So whatever skill we're learning, as said, phys ed, we'll look at that. Is it an open or closed skill? Is it a fine or gross skill? What are the muscle groups being used? What are the energy systems being used? If we can understand the actual nature of the task, that'll help us not only teach it, but help us learn. Right? We need to make sure we're catering so that we provide the best possible environment. Right? Now, beginners prefer what type of environment? They prefer a closed, simple environment. Why do they want it closed? So it's predictable. They've got control of it. You take any sort of open skill, for example, let's go softball. If we've got a beginner learning softball, particularly trying to bat, where there is a pitch coming at them, right, if the pitch isn't in the right spot, the batter's got no chance of hitting it. Or if the pitch is too quick, too fast, too good, again, the batter is not going to be able to develop their technique. So what do? We close the environment down. We make it predictable. We give them the pace to control it. So what do? Put the ball on a tee, suddenly it becomes tee-ball. So when we're teaching people new skills, trying to close the environment to make it predictable is very beneficial. And we can do that with any sport. Even if it's more a team sport. Kids are learning basketball and they're learning how to run the offensive strategy. Start with a 3-on-1. It's a little bit more predictable. Build up to a 3-on-2, then a 3-on-3. So it's important that we do understand the task first up. Now, when we are practicing skills, there's a couple of ways we can classify practice. We can classify it as massed practice. So massed is, as it says there, practicing the skill repeatedly over a long period of time. Best used for autonomous athletes, so in other words, people that are advanced. Example being, let's say 100 basketball free throws. NBA players, quite often at the end of the training, no doubt would sit there with the ball, have a whole rack of balls and just practice free throw after free throw after free throw. And they might put up 100 shots. That is very much massed practice where we are just repeating the action over and over and over again. Why we say it's best for autonomous athletes? What would happen to a little 6-year-old if I said put up 100 foul shots? Yes, they're going to get bored. Yes, they're going to get distracted, and yes, they're going to go into disruptive behaviours. Right? Whereas the autonomous athletes, they can concentrate. They don't need it to be a stimulated environment. And it might be a case of, they're working on refining a technique. Golfers are a great example, particularly when they change their technique, where they'll hit golf ball after golf ball. So autonomous athletes can see the value in what they're doing. They can concentrate for longer, and they're also able to give themselves feedback. If they miss, they normally know why they've missed. Whereas again, beginner athletes, more likely to become distracted, can't give themselves that feedback. So cognitive athletes aren't going to use mass practice as much. And as we've also got there, great for discrete skills. Again, the basketball throw, there's a distinct beginning and end. That's massed practice. So we're practicing on mass. Distributed is breaking the skill up. Now, whether that be over time or whether that be within a drill. So, example of distributed practice might be, or if I back up to maybe try and make it a little bit easier, mass practice. Let's change that to 100 shots at goal for an AFL footballer. So they're going to kick 100 goals after training. So that's mass practice. All right? Distributed, what we might do is go, hey, we still want to focus on goal kicking, but let's incorporate it within a drill. So we might kick out from fullback, we have to run it up the wing, kick it into the middle, kick to a full forward who takes the mark, then turns around and kicks the goal. So we're still having that goal kicking practice, but it is distributed throughout a drill. Okay, and as we've got over there, it's also distributing over time, where we might do a little patch here, a little patch there. Okay, so distributed is trying to mix skills up in between. Going to be much better for the younger, the beginner, the cognitive learners, because hey, they're stimulated throughout. They're learning different skills. Okay, so massed is yes on mass, doing a big block. Distributed is trying to incorporate other skills, incorporate variety. Other ways we can practice skills is what we call whole versus part practice. So whole is learning a skill in its entire form, best for simple skills. So for example, a bench press, very simple, we'll learn that as a whole. Whereas part practice is breaking it down into smaller parts, as we've got there. Right? PE teachers are great at doing this. Right? For example, let's go the pole vault. There's no way you would go pole vault, we're going to learn the whole thing at once. Chances are, if you were in year 8 and you had your PE teacher teaching you pole vault, chances are they would have started off with just the grip. So they've broken it down into smaller parts. Then once we've learnt the first steps, we then progress. So first we start with the grip. Then we start with just jumping off one foot with the pole. Then we go, the next step is, let's get a little bit of a run up, jump, probably land in the long jump pit. Then we're going to take the next step, jump, run up, jump, try and turn around facing the other way and land in the long jump pit. Then it'll be a case of putting the little elastic rope across. Once you've got the hang of that, then we might actually bring the mats in. So PE teachers are very good at going part practice, breaking the skills down into smaller parts so we can learn the whole picture eventually. As it says there, useful for more complex tasks. That's how most of us learn things. We start off with just the little first steps, then we go into the more complex ones. Okay, so we've got mass versus distributed, we've got whole versus part practice. When we're practicing, feedback is essential. How much we improve can sometimes depend on the quality of the feedback that we're given. And we've looked at feedback previously, but we'll have a look here. There's two types, internal and external. Internal makes sense, comes from within. Okay, so proprioceptors. So they're these things within the body that basically tell us where our body is in space, its position. Kinesthetics is also the feel, the movement. Now, again, autonomous athletes are very good at internal feedback. They've performed the action thousands and thousands of times. So they know when they've missed, why they've missed. It might be they didn't bend their knees enough to get enough power into the shot, and that's why it fell short. You look at golfers, basketballers, netballers. These sorts of athletes at the autonomous level might tee off or shoot a goal, and as soon as they've done it, they've just gone, nah. Because they know just a small part of the internal feedback through kinesthetics, which is the feel, the movement. They can just feel that movement was not quite right, and they know that shot's going to miss. Right? Some golfers tee off and straight away just know. They say, nah, not on. They know it hasn't felt right. Okay? So feedback could be internal, or feedback could be external. External, coming from outside. Now, coming from outside the body could come from another source. So it could be the coach. Could be the coach giving you feedback. External feedback could also be video analysis. You're looking at an external source. Right? Now, whether you're looking at that video analysis with a coach or whether you're watching yourself. So we do have internal and external feedback. Now, external feedback. So in other words, information outside the body. We've got two types. We've got knowledge of results and knowledge of performance. So knowledge of results, as the name suggests, is knowing about the result. So information about the performance, and it's generally answered with a simple yes or no. So was it successful? For example, if I'm shooting a foul shot in basketball, was it successful? Well, yes, it went in. So knowledge of results is quite simply yes or no. And you think, well, what sense would we use that in? For example, learning skills. It might be we've got some circuit activity set up and the kids have to practice their foul technique. Well, if it goes in, it's successful. It gives feedback to the kids to let them know, hey, your technique is good because you've succeeded. Now, it might not necessarily mean a good technique, but it does give feedback saying, hey, you were successful, yes or no. You missed, no, you weren't successful. So knowledge of results is quite simply just a yes or no, was it successful? Whereas knowledge of performance is receiving information about the performance. All right? Either what happened or how you can improve. So for example, you're having a shot at goal during a footy game, you miss, the runner comes out and all of a sudden says, hey, you missed. Well, you go, well, thanks for that. That's knowledge of results. I already knew that. The goal umpire waved one flag. Pretty obvious that I missed. Whereas the runner comes out and sends a message, hey, you didn't kick through the ball. Suddenly you've got knowledge of performance. Next time you know, okay, I better follow through with my kick. So when it comes to teaching cognitive learners, knowledge of performance is key. If a kid's learning softball, I'll go back to that example, and they're hitting off a tee. The kid misses the ball. I can say, you missed. Well, thanks, Mr. Driver. Already knew that. Already got my knowledge of results. Was I successful? No, the ball didn't move. Whereas Mr. Driver goes, hey, what you did there was you lifted your head. Make sure you keep your head down looking at the ball. I've now given them knowledge of their performance. So in the cognitive stage, knowledge of performance is going to be very powerful. And as I said earlier on, sometimes the quality of the feedback depends on the improvement. So the better the feedback, the greater the improvement. Now, it's not saying that autonomous athletes can't receive knowledge of performance. Right? Knowledge of performance is going to benefit others, but a lot of the time autonomous athletes know about the knowledge of performance because they've already got this internal feedback. So they know they missed because they didn't bend their knees or because they weren't hitting that shuttle at the highest point, whatever it might be. Okay. So there's a few questions there where you can look at the example and you can work out whether it is an example of knowledge of performance or knowledge of feedback. So for example, A, watching the shuttle go into the net when serving during badminton. Knowledge of performance or knowledge of results? Well, let's go the easy one. Is it knowledge of results? Can I be answering it with a simple yes or no question? Was it successful? No, it went into the net. Okay, so I know that's knowledge of results. Whereas if the coach said, hey, you didn't follow through with your racket, suddenly it becomes knowledge of performance. Right? So if you want to go through, work out those 5, whether they're knowledge of performance or knowledge of results, feel free, that's a little activity you can do. I won't go through all of them right now though. So we're looking at factors that affect learning. So we've got the way we can practice, right? We've got the type of feedback. Right? What are the environmental factors that affect the way we learn? So we all like a positive environment. We've all had a teacher or a coach who's very negative. And we just feel there's nothing we can do right. And you do get nervous because you think, well, I can't make mistakes. Mistakes are inevitable. So we do want a positive environment. Students or cognitive learners are more willing to try if they're able to make mistakes and they're not going to be crucified for them. So we do need a positive environment. Variety, which we've spoken about previously in other topics. Variety is key for learning. And I've used the example before, if you've got that one teacher that teaches the lesson the same every single lesson, you go in there knowing, and I pick on maths teachers, sorry guys, you go in there knowing we're just going to be doing bookwork for 50 minutes. You get bored straight away. Whereas variety keeps you interested, keeps you stimulated. Free of distractions. Right? Distractions are hard for learners because their attention is drawn to that. Right? Cognitive learners and young kids in particular, as soon as they see any other movement or they hear anything else, they stop, they look at that, they're no longer looking or listening to the coach or the teacher. All of a sudden, hey, they didn't get the right cues or they can't identify a signal. So we need to try and make an environment free of distractions. We like a competitive environment, but not too much. Yes, particularly us as phys eds, we love a bit of competition. All right? It encourages learning, it encourages us to get better. So competition can be a good thing. But if it's too competitive, it can be a turn off to some learners. So they're the environmental factors we want. So we've looked at how we can practice. We've looked at the type of feedback. We've looked at the environment. Now we actually have to look at who is learning. Whether it be children, whether it be teenagers, whether it be the elderly. Because they all learn in a different way. All right? Now I'm not going to mess with her. She looks serious. All right? Children. Lacking coordination and fine motor skills. All right? They don't have those fine motor skills. They need gross motor skills. All right? So we have to be aware of that when we're trying to teach children skills. Use simple language. Don't overload them. A couple of cues. And they lack concentration. Great example to watch is teachers try and talk to a large group of students for too long. You can see the kids off looking at the clouds, looking at the birds. They get distracted very easily. So we want to try and keep the instructions minimal. We want to keep the talking minimal. All right? Demonstrate. Teenagers, yes, you have a greater concentration. It's argued your concentration is your age plus 5 minutes. So for children, hey, 7 years old plus 5, 12 minutes. Still, there is no way I would talk for 12 minutes. Whereas teenagers, suddenly you get year 12s at the age of 18, in theory I can talk to you guys for 23 minutes. Well, that's probably a little bit more accurate. You guys, less stimulation is required. Particularly at a year 12 level where you realise you're there to work and you have to get the work done. And we're on such a short time schedule. Right? So the lessons don't always have to be super engaging because you guys have got a little bit more concentration. Having said that, if me as the teacher, or if I as the teacher, make a better lesson, make it more engaging, you are going to stay stimulated and you are probably going to learn better, which is why we always try and mix it up. Then the elderly, we look at them and we go, what are the issues with teaching the elderly? Well, yes, they are a little bit older, so they are a bit weak, a bit frail, so there's less movement. So I'd be expecting, I guess, less physical output from them. Suddenly getting a group of 70-year-olds to run the beep test seems almost cruel. Then you've got other issues in terms of poor hearing, poor memory. So it might be a case of you've got to repeat the cues every week. So you can see with different groups of people there are different challenges, and that's why we need to be able to be flexible and adapt. So junior primary teachers who are very good at teaching children, they might struggle coming into a senior setting. Vice versa. Secondary teachers might struggle going into there. Right? So it is very difficult if we want to try and teach all these different groups. But you just need to be aware of what group you're dealing with, okay, for whatever particular profession you go into. Retention of learning. In other words, how well do we go about remembering this stuff? So, how well does someone learn? Depends on what they do with the information they have received. So in other words, let's look at school. You guys come to school, you listen to the teachers babble on for 50 or 100 minutes. What happens to that information? Well, usually, it's what a lot of people say, in one ear and out the other. And it's not far off the truth. In terms of storing stuff into our memory, it needs to go through a process. And the first step in that process is the short-term sensory store. So this is unlimited information. So in other words, so much information is going through your short-term sensory store that you don't even realise. Don't look outside, but can you tell me what's going on with the weather today? How many clouds are in the sky? Is it windy? Which way is the wind blowing from? All these things go through your brain. But since it isn't processed, it isn't deemed important by your brain, it's just floated straight out of your brain within a second. Same as what the teacher says. Unless you process it, in other words, listen, process it as important, or write it down, or highlight it, or something, it is literally going to go in one ear and out the other. A great example of that is how many times has someone told you to do something, You've gone, yep. And then a minute later, you've gone, sorry, what was that? I wasn't listening. The information has gone into your brain, but you have not processed it, have not deemed it relevant, therefore slide straight back out. So, short-term sensory store, lots going on in there, but it's only once we deem it necessary, we actually process it, that it goes to the next level. And the next level is our short-term memory. It's the second stage of the process. All right? Now, this lasts for a little bit longer, so 60 seconds. So for example, if Mr. Driver said, righto, this is really important, I want you to listen. I'm going to give you a list of numbers. I give you the list of numbers, and you go, right, it's really important, I've got to remember them. So you get it from your short-term sensory, you get it to your short-term. Now it can stay there for about a minute, maybe a bit longer, all right, depending on how well you rehearse it. But again, from there, I can lose it if I don't deem it necessary and if I don't process it. Also, if I don't rehearse it, in other words, go over it. So if I gave you a list of numbers and you just kept reciting them in your head, reciting and reciting, you might be able to remember them for up to 3 minutes. But if you don't process it, you don't deem it relevant, and you don't rehearse it, it'll slip out. How much can we remember in our short-term memory? 7 to 9 pieces of information. Having said that, you can go beyond that, but you would have to use some different strategies. And we'll look at some of those a little bit later on. So, information comes into short-term sensory. If it's processed as important or relevant, from there, it's moved on. If we deem it irrelevant, we don't process it, it's forgotten, gone. So we've got it to the second stage. So depending on how much information's there and how much we rehearse it, we might be able to get it to the long term. Now, if something's stored in your long-term memory, it becomes permanent. And you think of some of the stuff that you know, just irrelevant, useless information. Maybe for some reason you decided to learn the alphabet backwards. If you spent 2 weeks just practicing and practicing, you'd get to a point where you'd learn the alphabet backwards, and it would be in there permanently. Right? So if we can get information into our long-term memory, it will stay there permanently, but it requires rehearsal. Let's look at another example. You come to this lesson, the information you listen to. If all you do is listen to it, it's probably going to go from here. Half of it's probably then going to be forgotten. You might get half of it to the short-term memory. At the end of the lesson, you then put your notes away and don't look at them again. It's forgotten. Whereas, you come to this lesson, information is in here. All right, you take notes, which means you've rehearsed it, you've deemed it relevant. Right, you've got it into there. Then 2 days' time, you bring it back out. And then in a week's time, you bring those notes back out. Eventually, it's going to end up here in our long-term memory. Come the end of the exam, end of year exam, you've done well. You've got a good mark. Whereas those that let it get to here, maybe let it get to here and then didn't rehearse it, suddenly it's gone. So rehearsal is important. So, what impacts on how well we can remember something? Well, the quality of instruction. Right, which also goes with our concentration. Right? So if we're not concentrating, chances are we're not going to remember something. Background noise. Also, our concentration plays a role there. If we're watching TV while someone at home tells us to do something, the noise is distracting us, we're not focused, all of a sudden it's forgotten. Prior knowledge. So, if I asked a couple of the guys in class to remember a list of one team's NBA players, there's going to be some of the blokes that follow NBA very closely. Since they've got prior knowledge, they might only have to remember 6 rookies that are on the list because they know all the others. Whereas those of us that don't follow the NBA would have to remember the whole list. Suddenly it becomes a lot harder. Chunking is a technique where we chunk information into groups. And we do that all the time with our mobile phone number, don't we? We normally go 4 numbers, 3 numbers, 3 numbers. It's not too often people go, oh, my phone number is 0428 659, all 10 digits. You can ring that number, by the way, because I don't know whose it is. We normally break it in 4 chunks. So 0428, let people get that. Then we go 651. Right. Relevance, a bit like that MBA example. How relevant the information is to you. If you deem it irrelevant, you're not going to remember it. And rehearsal, your revision. That's why Mr. Driver's been nagging you guys all year to revise your notes regularly. Because if you rehearse regularly, those notes are going to be processed in your long-term memory. Once it's in there, it's permanent. The sooner you can get it into your long-term memory, the easier an exam becomes, because we've got more information we can recall. So it's just a couple of little activities that we use to play some memory games. So if you're in class, I put out a list of 20 objects. You've got to try and remember them. I give you basically 30 seconds to look at them and see how we can recall them. And it gives people an opportunity to use some of these techniques. Right? You'll see some people with the 20 objects will make a story. So they're trying to make it more relevant. So let's say, you know, the objects were a table, a water bowl and a rock. It might be, they say, the water bowl and the rock sat down at the table to have a conversation. So they're putting into a story, trying to make it more relevant. Or they chunk them into groups. So it might be office supplies, furniture and outdoors. Just little strategies that try and help. Same as with our information or our essentials book, how it's divided up into different topics, trying to make that memory work. Okay, so when we're looking at factors that affect learning, right, we had, let's understand the nature of the task. That's the first thing. Then we've got, we need practice, whether it be massed or distributed. Then we need feedback. Also whole and part practice. Then we need feedback, whether that be internal or external, whether that be knowledge of results or knowledge of performance. Then we also need to understand the environmental factors that impact on our learning. We need to understand the characteristics of different learners. And we need to understand how the memory works. So if we understand all those processes, chances are we can have some success in terms of actually getting our learner, whether it be in a sporting sense or whether it be in a school sense, to experience success with a skill. Okay, so that's all for now, team. Thanks for that. Good luck.